Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 1-0 podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
I'm Lyle Allenstein.
And I'm Lexi Linderman.
Today, we'll share our thoughts from our recent trip to Purdue.
Oh, brother.
And then we'll preview Penn State's upcoming matchup at Minnesota. We will also be there providing you guys coverage in all sorts of forms, whether it's on social media, video content, obviously articles on the website. So make sure you stay tuned for our coverage of that. And then we'll hit on some college football playoff rankings, kind of our initial reactions to that, where the teams are ranked, where Penn State is ranked, everything like that. But we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So, guys, first of all, we made the trip to West Lafayette. Pretty cool campus. Got to walk around, see some things. Obviously got to watch a Penn State blowout. I was one touchdown away from predicting a perfect score in that game. I just want to say if Luke Reynolds did not dive into the end zone there at the end, I would have had the score predicted perfectly. But regardless, what were your guys' main takeaways from that game?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this one wasn't really close from the start. Shout out the Purdue press box. Excellent beverage selection, the canned lemonades, different variations. I think we all greatly appreciated that one. But going to the game itself, I mean, this was domination literally everywhere. Tyler Warren, we talk about him all the time, but I guess we'll just touch on what he did in this game. He had 80 receiving yards in the first quarter. He caught a double pass. Threw it to Drew. Drew threw it back to him. He took it for 48 yards. He was the leading rusher. We've asked so many guys this week about the Heisman pitch for him. Coaches, Franklin's talked about it. Ty Howell talked about it today. I saw in a few projections he's working his way up the leaderboard. I think the odds are still. I don't think he even has odds.
I think I don't think he's going to win the Heisman because I don't think he can beat.
Yeah, I just think he deserves a spot in New York.
I think if you're him, your best case scenario is you're a finalist. I think is the goal, realistically.
I think it was last week it was 2 weeks ago. We were in the press box and we got a little pamphlet about Tyler Warren being all great. I think they posted again on X today, advocating most complete tight end in the country with all the stats. So obviously, we'll see
the propaganda is in full swing right now. They're sending out emails with his stats and posting stuff on Twitter, and Bowling Green's doing the same thing. Bowling Green sent out a Herald fan email. Yeah. And then Penn State had to retaliate by sending out its own email about Tyler Warren. And
shout out Stratcom.
I mean, Harold Fannin does have better stats to his credit. He has 300 more receiving yards than Tyler Warren. And last I checked, he was second nationally in receiving yards. Including wide receivers. So he's
he's a glorified wide receiver.
I mean, he's having a historic monster season. But yeah, at the same time, it's he can't do the running that Tyler Warren can. He can't
the passing.
Pass. He can't. I don't know.
Or the blocking.
His blocking ability is the same either. So yeah, I mean, and then there's obviously the strength of schedule argument, and obviously playing in the MAC, which
I love me some action.
A decent MAC conference this year. Obviously, NIU beat Notre Dame, and some of the other schools have been having pretty good years. Miami, Ohio is having a good season. Ohio is having a good season. Some other schools there. So, but obviously, it's not on the same level as the Big Ten. And so, when you're comparing that, I think that's where you give the edge to Tyler Warren, at least for the Mackey. I think the Mackey, realistically, he should win that. I think.
I agree.
I agree with that.
But I guess we talked about Tyler Warren, so we get to go to the other side of the ball. Going back to Purdue, a little tangent right there. But I think we saw Deny came back. Obviously, he's been limited the past two games. Hasn't really had a large snap count. Obviously, he didn't even start the past two games because when he got hurt against Wisconsin, he came back in first play of the half after going on the bike after leaving in the second quarter, combined with Kobe King for a sack, but then just took himself out of the game. So we hadn't really seen him at full strength. But he's still not at full strength because obviously I was talking to him post-game, just what it meant to get back, how he was feeling health-wise. And 80% was his number, hoping to get to 100% this week, which I think is incredibly scary for opposing offensive lines because we saw, obviously, Abdul's been dominant regardless if Denai's been on and off the field. But we saw what the two of them were capable of doing together. And, I mean, granted, Purdue, not the strongest opponent, but you get them executing like they did on Saturday, I think that's going to take this defense as far as it needs to go.
Yeah, kind of going back to the offense, though, I think Drew Aller had a great game, and I think he just continues to look better and better. I mean, only 2 incompletions. I mean, sure, it was Purdue, 2 incompletions. I mean, sure, it was Purdue, but, regardless, that's still, pretty good, considering, they have some talent in the secondary. So he looked good against Purdue for sure. Then we also got a touchdown from a wide receiver.
Wow.
Harrison Wallace III, wide open. I think fans have been
wide open.
Yeah.
Quite literally wide open.
I think fans have been looking for that, waiting for that. It's been a while. I mean, Harrison Wallace didn't have a touchdown since West Virginia, the very first game of the season when he kind of looked like that wide receiver one that people were hoping for. And so I think, he can kind of take that moving forward. Hopefully, for Penn State, more production from their wide receivers moving forward. Still wasn't like a big day for them against Purdue, which, against a team like that, you kind of want to kind of get them going. But, still like a solid day, I would say, for Harrison Wallace III. And then obviously we talked about Tyler Warren. But, yeah, so I think the offense continued to look good. 2 straight touchdowns on their first 2 possessions, kind of following up from 4 straight against Washington. So I think that, it seems like they took what happened against Ohio State, reflected on it, and have, taken the effort to fix what was wrong. I mean, Tyler Warren's gotten the ball more than he has the entire season these past 2 weeks, and coming off Ohio State where he didn't really get the ball that much. So I really think they've just kind of honed in on the issues that they saw in the film against Ohio State and have really focused on those, and, it's working for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of the Tyler Warren show at this point. I mean, Penn State was heavily criticized for not using him in that, goal line disaster against Ohio State. And ever since that moment, it's been like, just Tyler Warren, like every play in some capacity is going to be involved. And no matter where he's lining up, obviously he's just kind of such a weapon that the defense always has to key in on where he is and what he's doing at all times, which is really difficult because, if he's lined up out wide and you're trying to put a corner on him or, you want to put his safety over to the top to double and then, say he motions in the backfield, well, now what are you going to, you have to switch over to like a linebacker or something like that. And it's almost impossible to guard him, which I think is kind of what has allowed him to have so much success. Like,
He hasn't seen me on defense yet, though.
Think
about
that's
that
true.
Yeah.
Technically, he has not seen you on defense. I don't think any of us have, but I mean, no one's been able to stop him so far. And I wouldn't even say that Ohio State stopped him because I would say that was Penn State stopped him by not giving him the ball more than anything. But I do think Penn State has rebounded nicely from that Ohio State game and played 2 really good games where they've kind of fixed some of those issues that have been plaguing them. Fast starts was something that everyone talked about throughout the beginning of the season, and that's something that, against Washington, 4 straight touchdowns to start the game. Against Purdue, 2 straight touchdowns to start the game. So they're coming out hot, coming out a lot faster. The offense looks more crisp, and, I think you could argue that getting Tyler Warren involved is a big part of that. And I would also say that not trying to get too cute has benefited Penn State because you go back to the Ohio State game, Drew was in there for 3-4 plays, and then they brought in Bo. And then they brought in Tyler Warren. So they had 3 guys taking snaps in the first 5 or 6 plays of that game. And that first drive ends up stalling out and they kick a field goal instead of what, could have been a touchdown on that opening drive. And I think that, switching out guys like that so quickly into the game can kind of get Drew out of rhythm. And these last 2 weeks, it's been kind of all Drew until, garbage time. And then they put in Bo. And we still haven't seen Ethan Grunkemeyer. Which is a little bit interesting to me because if there was an opportunity to get him in, it was probably that Purdue game. I don't know if you're going to have a better opportunity than that. So that I think is a little bit worrying because it's like, it's 10 games into the season, you haven't seen him take a snap yet. And Franklin talked about that a little bit and, kind of tried to address it. But I still feel like, regardless of how you feel about him, when you're up by, 39 points or whatever, I feel like you should trust even though he's a third-string quarterback, you should trust him not to blow a 39-point lead with 3 minutes left in the game. Like, you could throw him in there.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting because the nature of the game, they got all the young guys in. I think post-game after the Purdue game, obviously, he said 68 guys got in. I think he corrected himself on Monday. He said 66. From what we know, the travel roster is 72. And you saw Luke Reynolds get that first career touchdown. You saw Tyseer Denmark finally get some burn, had a nice punt return. A couple of the younger corners, Antoine Belgrave-Shorter, John Mitchell, Jalen Harvey. Obviously, he went down, but he went back at practice. So Xavier Gilliam and Caleb Artis, defensive tackles. So you saw the youth. You saw a good glimpse of the future and what they can contribute, just obviously in state of the game of the blowout, but you got an idea of what they can do down the line. And Franklin talked about previous Monday how they can get a good gauge on, because a lot of those guys, in terms of the freshmen, with these remaining regular season games, aren't going to burn their red shirt. So if they can contribute down the line in the playoffs, that's a good indicator. And obviously, Grunkemeyer is not really in that conversation because you're going to have Drew in the game and you're going to have Bo as the backup if anything happens to Drew. But it's like I feel like you got to put him in the game because when I look at last year or like I don't think it was last year. Was Delaware last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, because they were blowing them out the whole time, and Bo got in. But like Jackson Smollett got in for 2 snaps. And it's like, I don't really think there's been a history of them playing third-string quarterbacks, at least when I've been watching Penn State. I think freshman year, I forget, it was either one of the random Michigan schools or it was Ohio. But when Drew got in after Sean, and I think Christian Valaire got like a few snaps, but it wasn't anything to like give him a good, fair evaluation of what he is as like the third-string quarterback. And I think Grunk's going to have his time, whether it be next year or the following year, depending on what Drew does. But I think it was interesting because Franklin talked about how prepping a third rep, a QB with live like first-string reps, to kind of diminishes the purpose of like getting Drew and Bo actual reps during practice, because you don't really want to prep for 3 starts. I think he said he gets 24 live reps, but it's like, it's good that he's getting these reps, and obviously we don't get these kind of looks during practice. But I just think as long as he's getting work in, because the staff and players have talked so highly of him, I wouldn't really be too concerned. Would I have liked to see him just in a game like that? Yes, but his time will come.
Yeah, I also think his time will come. I wanted to see him against Purdue, just because of like all the hype that they've talked about him a lot. I mean, they seem to think very highly of him. I mean, Drew's talked very highly of him. Daniel Bryan's talked very highly of him. So I did want to see him get some game action. I was thinking we would get it against Kent State. We didn't get it, and then none against Purdue again. But I mean, it could be one of those things where they really just want to get Bo as much game action as possible. Because like say Drew leaves, they want to have him like fully ready, and like sure he gets a good amount of game action already, but I mean, live game reps is always going to be the most important thing. And if, Drew is leaving for the NFL, Bo's obviously the next guy up. So maybe it's like something like that. But I also just think, it doesn't hurt to just, get Grunk in there for 2 snaps, kind of like Lyle was saying. But, I mean, we didn't get to see it. And so we probably won't see him the rest of the season. So who knows, And also, like, Jackson Smollett's still, like, nursing back an injury. So Grunk might not even be QB 2 or 3 come next year. So, like, that's,
That's true. That's a fair point. We can go ahead and kind of pivot forward to this Minnesota game. Minnesota comes into this one at 6-4. They, it's been a pretty up and down season for them, I would say. They start by losing to North Carolina, and North Carolina's kind of struggled this year. So obviously a bad loss to open the season. Took losses to Iowa and Michigan, which are obviously not easy opponents to play against, but still. And then they kind of get hot, get on a little winning streak, beat USC. Beat Illinois, which is a ranked win, and it looked like they were kind of getting hot. I think they either popped into the rankings or were in the receiving votes, and then they went and lost to Rutgers and drop out. So, just kind of an up and down season for the Golden Gophers, but I think this is still a team that can be dangerous. Again, they beat USC the week before USC played Penn State, knocked USC from like 11 to unranked, which I still don't understand, but.
At the time, that was a big one.
Yeah, no, at the time, great win for Minnesota. Hasn't necessarily aged well, but I also think this is a team that has proven to be dangerous with, a win over then number 11 USC and then number 24 Illinois. So I think Minnesota maybe gets up for some of these bigger games, and they also get this game at home. So, I mean, maybe that's something to watch for. I tend to believe that Penn State will take care of business in this one, just, kind of given Franklin's track record. I don't know if it's too big of a threat, but what are kind of some of the storylines you guys are looking for in this game?
I'm looking at, well, first of all, Franklin's never had a season where he's been undefeated on the road, so I think that's kind of interesting to look at. I mean, he obviously takes care of business against, unranked teams usually, but he hasn't had the undefeated season on the road, so, like, this could just be a year of first for him where, like, he gets that undefeated season on the road, he gets that first playoff bid. But, that's something interesting, like, especially because, like, Minnesota, I think, if you compare Minnesota and Maryland, obviously Minnesota is the more dangerous team, if Penn State's going to lose one of these next 2 games for sure. I mean, their defense has a pretty good secondary, but their offense isn't too explosive. I think it's more like short passes, and so I think that Penn State just needs to tackle well, honestly, in this one. But I honestly just think Penn State's coming in with all the momentum, and so they should be okay. But also, you never know. There's been just a lot of talk, especially at media this week, to the players about, the playoff rankings and everything. And it's kind of easy to look past these last 2 games, especially considering where they're at. So, it just depends on if they're really into that 1-0 mentality, which, they all say that they are. And then, if they're able to contain Minnesota and not go home with, a loss.
I think the biggest thing for me, obviously, like, excluding like looking ahead to the playoffs, just taking care of business. But when I look at Minnesota, I look at their secondary. This is a very talented group. They force a lot of turnovers as well. Coy Parrish, freshman, he's a top 100 recruit. You think he's got 5 interceptions this year. He's a really good player in the secondary. And so I think that's just something to keep an eye on because I want to see the wide receivers get involved. I know we say it like every week and we see flashes of it, but the way the offense is clicking right now, obviously the run game has been mitigated a little bit. I mean, it doesn't really matter, though, when you Tyler Warren and Nick Singleton is still recovering and Bo can scamper down the sideline for a 40-yard touchdown. But I just think the secondary is going to be a good test because I'm not concerned about Maryland, obviously, but, college football, anything could happen. But I really want to see the passing game get going because I think the way that they've started offensively these past 2 games against Washington and Purdue, granted, weaker opponents, but they've talked about starting fast. They've done that. Washington was 4 straight touchdowns. Purdue was 2 straight touchdowns. And just the way the offense is clicking right now, I think this is going to be a good test against Minnesota. Again, it's not the strongest team, but I think this is the best test they've had since Ohio State. Obviously, PJ Fleck's had a chip on his shoulder. Minnesota did beat Penn State 2019, last time that Minnesota hosted them. So there's little things to look for. Obviously, they're playing for a trophy, right? What is it? The Victory Bell? I don't even know what it is.
They have something, yeah.
Yeah, Drew, I didn't know what it was. So
some piece of junk.
Yeah.
They found at a yard sale for $5.
I mean, I've always been more of a land-grant trophy guy
I was going to say land-grant
Michigan
trophy
State.
is way better.
I mean, I think it'll be interesting. Obviously, with the secondary comes the way that Drew Aller's been playing. He's been really effective with his decision-making. Really efficient. Obviously, he only played 3 quarters, 17 for 19 against Purdue. And one of them was an incompletion because it was just Kathryn on this other one just straight up dropped it. James Franklin talked about earlier this week how Drew doesn't get the attention that he deserves. He said he wouldn't go into detail why at his Monday presser. He got followed up with that on Wednesday and then declined to comment on it. I think I know why. I think it's because Drew hasn't won a big game. And that's why he's not getting the national attention that he deserves with these other quarterbacks. And I think it's justified, his reasoning, because I think Drew is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. But he doesn't have that win. And I think it's a good test. Obviously, he's not going to get that win between the playoff if that happens. But I just think it's something to keep an eye on. I think, obviously, Drew's the least likely to actually care about what people are saying about him, other than maybe Tyler Warren. But it's I think as these next 2 regular season goes on and the pressure more comes to Penn State, especially with these playoff rankings with the whole SEC Big Ten dilemma, I think it's just going to be something to note how Drew does going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I would push back a little bit on kind of the big game situation, just kind of given what's around Drew. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the receiver room has been, bad. I'll just straight up say it. But even, you look at something small like that interception he threw in the end zone, if Harrison Wallace just catches the ball when it's in between his hands instead of basically giving it to the safety and allowing an interception, all of a sudden Drew's stat line goes from 12 for 20 to 13 for 20, and the 1 interception is now 1 touchdown, no interceptions. And obviously that stat line looks a lot better, and maybe even Penn State goes on to win that game if they get that touchdown because potentially would have been
or they give the ball to Tyler Warren at the goal line.
Score. Right, and maybe they win that game. And so I don't think Drew played particularly bad against Ohio State, and I will say he did look bad last year. Against Ohio State and Michigan last year, he was overthrowing guys. He was just completely missing guys. I think this year he looked a lot better against Ohio State, and it wasn't necessarily his fault. I would put more of the blame on the receivers. So I think he has looked a little bit different in those bigger games this year, and we've seen a little bit more resiliency from him. I look at the USC game in particular, but it's been interesting to see how efficient he's been recently. I tweeted about this earlier this week, and you look at some of his numbers, particularly yards per pass attempt. He's number, I think, 3 in the country. So not only is he completing these passes at a pretty high rate, I think he's number 5 in completion percentage. But they're also going for yards. He's not just a check down merchant. He's averaging 9.9 yards per completion or per attempt or something. So he's definitely been pretty impressive, and I don't think he's gotten the recognition he deserves going against some of these better Big Ten defenses. Going into that Washington game, there was kind of a similar narrative where it's Washington's allowing the second fewest passing yards per game in the country, and Drew Aller had no problem, played a very clean game against Washington. It's kind of a similar narrative. You mentioned Coy Parrish, huge pickup for Minnesota, probably the best player on that team. I mean, I know he was a guy that, like you mentioned, top 100 recruit. Ohio State wanted him really bad. Ryan Day took a personal visit to his house to try and recruit him. He turned him down, stuck with the in-state school, went to Minnesota, which is, a huge win for PJ Fleck. That's obviously a big piece of their defense, and even though, just a freshman, he's been a big leader for them. Offensively, I look at Darius Taylor, who I think is the most underrated running back in the Big Ten. Some of the plays that he's able to make with a probably below average, I would say, offensive line has been really impressive. He's been a key piece for them. And Minnesota typically doesn't have a great offense or a great passing attack. I think it's been a little bit different with Max Brosmer. I think efficient is a good word to kind of describe the Minnesota passing attack. So I think it will be a little bit challenging for Penn State. There are a couple of guys that you have to watch out for on the Gophers. Whereas going into the Purdue game, it's like there's nobody that really scares you. But you look at Minnesota and there's a couple guys where it's like if Darius Taylor has a big day, and he runs for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's like you could be in trouble there very easily if you're not kind of locked in on stopping him and doing the things that are necessary to win this game. All that being said, I think Penn State wins. I think Penn State covers. We can kind of transition into our score predictions now. So the spread is, I believe, 13.5 was the last I saw. I think I've also seen 12.5, so it's kind of hovering around that 13-point, 2-touchdown-ish range. I think Penn State wins, and I think Penn State covers. I have the Nittany Lions winning this one 27-10.
I got Penn State 30. Wow, Minnesota 13. I think the run game is one that capitalizes in this one. I want to see the passing attack succeed, but I think it's just going to come back to the run game. I think Nick Singleton, obviously coming into the Purdue game, limited after leaving with injury against Washington, only had 7 carries, didn't really need to touch the ball a whole lot. Me personally, I wouldn't have had to really give him the ball a whole lot because I knew that game was over before it really started. But I'd like to see him get going. I think that run game is going to take them far in this one. I want to say Tyler Warren does a little bit. Bold take, I know. But I just don't think Minnesota's going to be able to keep up. I think their environment's great. PJ Fleck, I think, is a great coach, and he's been doing something great ever since he took over there. But I don't think Minnesota's roster has enough firepower to keep up in this one.
I've got Penn State winning 31-14. I think it's going to be a defensive dominating day for Penn State. I think James Franklin said this week that he doesn't think the defense or Tom Allen is getting the recognition they deserve. And I think this is the kind of game where, they really show that. I think, Abdul Carter has been on a heater. I think he continues that trend. And like Lyle said, I think the offense just keeps up with the efficiency. I don't think Minnesota's going to be able to keep up. And, I think Penn State covers and goes home with this win.
We'll round out this episode by sharing some thoughts on the newest edition of the college football playoff rankings, where Penn State stayed at number 4. Personally, I thought it was a pretty fair ranking. You could even argue that Penn State could be ahead of Texas. Texas resume, I think, got a little bit better with a 20-10 win over Arkansas last Saturday. It bumped up their strength of schedule slightly, so that's a little bit more on par with what Penn State's is. I think those two teams are kind of neck and neck. If you want to nitpick between them, I think the difference is kind of the loss, where Penn State has a 7-point loss to Ohio State that was competitive. Texas really just kind of got bullied by Georgia, lost 30-15, and I think it was a little bit more lopsided than even the score would indicate there. So I think that's kind of the argument if you're Penn State, that you could maybe potentially even be number 3, but of course they're never going to leave an SEC team out of the top 3.
Never.
When they have the opportunity to do so. Indiana comes in right behind Penn State at number 5. That team, I think you could argue, could be above Penn State just because of the undefeated record, and they've pretty much dominated every game apart from the Michigan game. And if you were to switch the logos, on the uniform, Indiana's probably number 1 or 2 right now, because their resume stacks up pretty much with what Oregon's done, obviously with a different strength of schedule. But in terms of how they've been able to control games, how they've been able to dominate, both being undefeated. Obviously, Indiana struggled a little bit with Michigan. Oregon struggled with Boise State. Oregon only beat Idaho by 10 points. Almost lost to Ohio State. Probably should have lost that game. And so when comparing resumes, I think Indiana's being held back just because of kind of the history behind the program. And, do I think they would beat any of those other teams? No. But do I think they're deserving of a higher ranking? I would certainly listen to that argument.
You're gassing Indiana way too much.
Why?
Indiana's strength of schedule is like 106th.
Okay.
Which is, I think, 70 places lower than like Penn State, and Oregon's like somewhere in the middle in there.
So what do you want Indiana to do about that?
Indiana hasn't played anybody. What
do you want Indiana to do about that?
Nothing, but you were gassing up their strength of schedule like it was like nightmare.
No, I didn't say it was good. I said they've looked good.
Yeah, I just don't think they haven't played any. I think if Indiana loses by 2 scores, like 14 points, including extra points, I don't think they make the playoff.
I agree.
But do you think they should?
No.
No. I mean, well, okay, when I say no, that's just because obviously I've watched Indiana football this year, and what Kirk Cignetti has done is great. Curtis Rourke is, I think, a top 6 quarterback in the Big Ten. But we haven't seen
top 6.
top 6. You know me, I'm specific like that. But they just haven't played anyone that I feel like I have a fair gauge of what they are. They take care of business. They blow teams out, but they haven't played anyone. If they can hang with Ohio State, I have no problem with them being ranked over Penn State.
But they also like they take care of business, but like they only beat Washington 31-17. Penn State dominated Washington, but then also they only beat Michigan by 5 points. Like Michigan's not a good football team. Like sure, they haven't looked like sure. Like I think they deserve the top 5 ranking, but like I mean obviously we'll see this weekend.
I mean this is where the whole like SEC like Big Ten thing comes into play. James Franklin talked about it yesterday. How he's got the experience being a coach both conferences, and he thinks that they should be the most represented, which makes sense. Totally agree, but the 2-loss SEC versus the 1 Big Ten team loss, it's just such an interesting, like, how the committee views it.
Well, okay, but Texas hasn't played anyone either.
I'm not arguing with Texas. I'm not arguing with Texas. I'm talking about the Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia. Like, they're beating up on each other, which I think hurts it in terms of how they're seeded. But I think that needs more recognition for how they're, like, ranked in the poll. You know what I'm saying?
More recognition of what?
Like I think you can make the argument. Maybe not. You make the argument. I'm not saying necessarily true. Like Georgia and Alabama are better teams than Penn State and Indiana.
Well, yeah.
But because they have 2 losses, the committee's going to immediately jump to seeding them lower than Penn State and Indiana.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they lost.
Yeah.
But it just might not make sense. You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, it does make sense because they lost.
Because I think there is a world where they get ranked over Penn State and Indiana when there's 2 losses.
If what? Penn State's 1 loss?
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, they're already getting the benefit of the doubt because when you look at the rankings, the highest 2-loss teams in order are Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and then Colorado.
God, I can't believe Texas A&M.
So out of every 2-loss team in the country, the top 5 in the rankings are from the SEC. So they are already getting respect despite having the 2 losses. Like they're already much higher than all the other 2-loss teams in the country.
Do you think, I'm going to throw a hypothetical out here.
Oh, gosh.
A 1-loss, whoever doesn't win the ACC or the Big 12. So like a 1-loss Clemson, Miami, BYU, Colorado, whatever. 1 loss for those teams. You just think it's like not even a question. You throw the 2-loss SEC team over them?
Well, they would have 2 losses because if they lose in the conference championship, that would be the 2nd loss.
Okay. That makes sense.
So 2-loss SEC would be. I mean, and there's still games. Like Texas has to play Texas A&M.
That's good. It's time to play the game.
There are games. There are games, guys. That's our analysis. There will be games. Texas plays Texas A&M, and Texas A&M can win that game. And if Texas A&M wins that game,
then Texas should
stay
just
at
not
2
deserve
losses.
to be in the playoff.
Well, Texas A&M would stay at 2 losses. Texas would have 2 losses. So then you'd have like 7 SEC teams with 2 losses.
Then Texas should be gone because Texas's strength of schedule isn't good either. But when you have the 2-loss Texas compared to all the other 2-loss SEC teams, their strength of schedule doesn't even come close. And I just don't think they deserve a spot, in my opinion. They couldn't compete with Georgia. Like,
oh yeah, no. Like they got ran off the field by Georgia, and that's a 2-loss Georgia team. That's not like you
got blown out by Ole Miss.
Right. And
So
Ole Miss lost to what? Kentucky.
Yeah, so it's just like Alabama lost to Vandy. Like,
and Vandy lost to Georgia State. So really,
it's like Christian Valle.
Georgia State, Christian Valle, it all comes back.
I also think it's just interesting. Like, I mean, I feel like the committee's just always going to have that, like, SEC bias. Like, that's just, like, not
but like
going anywhere. No.
And, like, you could argue they deserve it because of what they've done.
You also have to look at, like, why is Missouri still in the top 25?
Okay, yeah, that's
that's
Come
just...
on. Like...
These analysts do not watch every single football game. When Booger McFarland is saying during the Tuesday ranking show that Penn State struggled with UCLA.
I think, my theory is that he meant to say USC. But I don't know. Because that would just make sense.
But it's just like Paul Feinbaum. But he said that Indiana had a loss. Like,
oh, yeah. Well, he's the worst, dude.
It's just, I mean, he's like an
He's
SEC, he's an SEC, diehard. But, like, I mean, he runs SEC Network, whatever. He's like an analyst for him. But it's just like, learn ball.
It's just all ears and no
I
brain.
get not watching all the games. I'm sure people on the committee don't even watch all these games, but it's just like it doesn't take more than 3 minutes to look at a box score, Maybe some highlights.
Please, just do your job.
It doesn't
Like,
take.
It's bad, dude. And like, I think that's why it's so divisive, where the SEC kind of hates everyone else and everyone else kind of hates the SEC, because there's no other conference that like has a Paul Feinbaum. Like, there's no one out here who's like screaming that like the Big 12 is so good and that like Colorado would, win the SEC or whatever.
You would bring up Colorado.
Well, Colorado might win the Big 12 now, which is not a great look from my earlier take, but also, if Boise State is ranked higher than the Big 12 champion, they'll get the number 4 seed.
Mm-hmm.
And the Big 12 champion might be like number 12. Or they might even get left out of the playoffs entirely if they're not a top 12 team.
I just think the Big 12 is fraudulent. Arizona State can have a chance at this point. It's like
Arizona State probably wins, yeah.
So
at
like
point.
Big 12 is whoever they play.
Well, it's a mess, and it's a one bid league.
I think Boise State deserves a bye over the Big 12. I'm not gonna. Do I think?
Yeah.
Well, right now they are. Right now they're on pace for 4.
So it's just like, do I think they're necessarily better? I don't know. Ashton Genty is good at football. That's all I really think I need to know. But it's just like, I don't know. I think Big 12 doesn't deserve the bye over Boise State, because I'm just assuming Boise State is going to be that team at this point.
Well, I also just think it's interesting. I mean, Franklin talked about this yesterday, how like all of this like decisiveness, it's like he was saying how problematic it is that like these auto bids are like a thing, because he's under the impression that like the Big Ten and SEC should just have the most teams, and like by giving auto bids to like a Mountain West team and like everything. But I think Boise State is a top 12 team in the country. I mean, like you can make that argument, but like it's a little. And is any Big 12 team a top? Like no. So like it's like one of those things. So it's like Tennessee, like ranked number 11, like has wins that like would make them a top 12 team, but they're not gonna.
And they've got Vandy coming up, so
Okay, well, yeah, but like right now they wouldn't make the playoff because of these auto bids, and so I think that like that's where like the SEC is like mad, is like because like all these teams keep beating up on each other, and so then it's like someone's gonna get left out, and it's just a matter of like figuring out who,
The quote from Franklin yesterday was, I forget the order, but it was the Big Ten should not be taking shots at the SEC, and the SEC should not be taking shots at the Big Ten. And I agree with him to an extent if they're like looking at which team between the two conferences should have more representatives. But when you like Kirby Smart is talking about like that, during that post-game interview, just gassing up the SEC, it's just like, come on, man.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll just be interested to see how it plays out, because obviously everyone can argue, and we're going to hear, crazy takes on both sides where, we've already heard, Vanderbilt would beat Penn State by 2 touchdowns, but then obviously there's people saying, Indiana would beat Georgia or whatever. Like there you could find people on both sides who are, a little whatever, but
it's good. Yeah, I like that.
But I mean, we'll find out. The games will be played.
It just means more though.
As we said.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out if it does, because the games will be played. And we can finally settle the argument. I think what's most likely going to happen is that there will be a lot of close games, and it'll probably be kind of a 50-50 split between like, Big Ten SEC teams winning, and probably the Big Ten will have the national championship, because in my eyes, Oregon and Ohio State are the 2 best teams in the country right now. So I think one of them probably pulls it out, but obviously the SEC will probably get some wins, especially in that first round, because they're going to have so many teams in there. And things like that. So I think, obviously both conferences will probably dominate. Whoever's in there from the Big 12 will probably lose first round. Whoever's in there from the ACC will probably lose first round. And Boise probably loses first round.
Boise won't lose first round if they have the bye.
Boise will lose its first game. But whatever, we'll find out. We'll find out on the field. And we won't have to keep arguing about it anymore. But for now, that's what gets us clicks. So that's what we'll keep talking about. Yeah, those are our thoughts. We'll close it out there. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in to listen to our thoughts. If you enjoyed our content, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to help us out and show some appreciation. Like we mentioned, we'll have some coverage coming to you guys from Minnesota on Saturday and the days before and the days after. So stay tuned for that. You can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials to keep up.